Hey, welcome back, podcast friends, to another episode of Nutrition Prescription Wellness versus Medications. And today I have a gentleman that I've been dying to get on my podcast for 2, 3 years now. And I actually just never got the guts to ask him. And finally, we met at Meat Stock this a couple months ago, which was a fantastic conference in Gatlinburg, Tennessee. And he was so gracious to say yes. So today I want to introduce Dr. Anthony Chaffee. Thank you so much, Dr. Chaffee, for coming on here today.
No, you're very welcome. Thank you very much for having me.
And for those of you who don't know Dr. Chaffee, Dr. Anthony Chaffee is an American medical doctor practicing in Australia with over 25 years of research into optimal human nutrition and performance. He asserts that most chronic diseases stem from dietary factors and can be reversed through species-specific nutritional interventions. So as a medical doctor and chief clinician at Elevate Medical Center in Perth, Dr. Chaffee treats chronic disease and optimizes metabolic health through nutrition, lifestyle modifications, and traditional medicine when needed. He previously served as a neurosurgical registrar at St. Charles, is it Gardner? Gardner. St. Charles Gardner Hospital before transitioning to metabolic health practice. So welcome, Dr. Chaffee.
No,
and first, I guess I just want to start right in and say, in your bio, you actually said that you assert that most chronic diseases stem from dietary factors and can be reversed through species-specific nutritional interventions. So tell us, why do you think that the carnivore diet is actually species-specific for the human diet?
Well, yeah, it's just the diet that we've been eating the longest. We've been eating a carnivore diet since humans have been humans, since the Ice Age has started about 2.5 million years ago, as far as we can tell. Homo habilis and our ancestors in that era were transitioned into being apex predators, being able to use tools, tactics, and brain power to take down mastodons and giant sloths and huge animals that we don't have the physical capacity and characteristics to take down. But because we figured out how to use tools and we drive a herd of these animals over a cliff and then they die from impact, and then we can use the tools to cut them up, they figured out how to become apex predators and to thrive under these very harsh conditions where the ice shelves were coming down and wiping out whole ecosystems and making many forms of life go extinct, both plant and animal. The early humans at that time that didn't go full carnivore, that were more omnivorous or even more plant-based, they all died out. And so our ancestors were the ones that survived, and they survived by being apex predators. That is what the data shows. And since then, you saw this inflection of growth. So our height and brain size started growing exponentially since then. And it's the fastest growth in brain size, certainly, and potentially height as well, that we've ever seen in the fossil record. And then 10,000 years ago, with the advent of agriculture, when the last ice age stopped and the megafauna died out, likely from some sort of cataclysmic event, because they all died out all over the world on every continent. When that happened, and some people had to switch to agriculture and they had to start using more plant-based diets in order to just survive, you see this sharp decline in both the height and brain size and health of those populations when they adopted a more plant-based diet. So you still had populations that were largely meat-based, animal-based, or even full apex predator carnivores. We're all apex predators. We're actually considered super predators. We're beyond apex predators because we take out, hunt, kill, and eat more apex predators than any other apex predator on planet Earth. We are able to hunt every single animal on land, air, and sea. Nothing else can do that. And so,
what do you mean by apex predator? What's apex?
Apex means top of the food chain, means that you don't have any normal predators. And so you can get eaten by things, but that doesn't mean that's your prey. A sea lion is a top level predator, but they have predators that regularly feed on them, like great white sharks and orca whales. But they, apart from that, they're basically at the apex. They eat everything else below them on the food chain, but they get eaten regularly. So they're not quite there. So we can get eaten by lions, we can get eaten by sharks, whatever, but that's not a shark's regular meal. Our humans are not the normal prey animal for great white sharks or lions. It's just opportunistic. And it's actually gone way worse for sharks and lions than it has for humans. Early humans in the caveman There's a Smithsonian article where they said that humans, I think maybe Cro-Magnon man, hunted cave lions to extinction. And what they thought it was because they liked their pelts. So they had all these examples of pelts of these lions and they wiped them out to extinction. And that's with sticks. And we have the Maasai, who now are herders in Tanzania and those sorts of regions. And they live out there in the midst of lions, and they have to protect their herds from lions and protect themselves and their families from lions. And in fact, one of the ways that they hunt and gather meat is they'll actually scare off lions from their kill, because the lions actually know, they recognize them as, these guys are dangerous. These guys are trouble. Let's get the hell away from that. And it was, for a long time, it was part of the rites of passage of becoming a man and recognized as a skilled hunter. You went out and you had to kill a lion with a stick. They had spears and things like that. And so these guys are fighting lions with sticks, and they're winning. And the lions have come to recognize them as such a danger that when the lions get a kill, the Maasai will pop up and then just start walking towards them just really confidently. And the lions are like, what the hell is going on? And they'll take off and they'll scatter. And then they'll come in, they'll cut off a leg, and they'll take that and they'll walk off, and they'll leave the rest of it for the lions. So they're not trying to drag off the whole thing and then making them go, hold on, we might have to fight for this. It's okay, that's enough. We'll let that go. And they're doing that today. They're doing that to this day. We're actually considered super predators, not just apex predators. And apex predators and super predators are just things that, by definition, hunt and kill and eat other animals. So obviously, even if you're not a full carnivore 100%, you're at least in that direction. Right. And so what we found is about 10,000 years ago, with the advent of agriculture, in the places and areas where they adopted agriculture, the height and brain size shrunk massively, very quickly. So the human brain size actually shrank 50 times faster than it grew. So that's not evolutionary, that's not biological, that's environmental. Right. You're not getting the right nutrients to your brain, you're not getting the right nutrients to your body. And so average height dropped by 6 inches as well. This is very quickly in the fossil record. And then jaws were smaller, teeth were crooked, they got cavities, they had signs of poor wound healing and metabolic disease, or even infectious disease, such as tuberculosis in the spine. There are all sorts of these things immediately after agriculture. And in fact, you can tell the difference between a skull pre and post agriculture because of the shape. It's the shape of the skull and the brain's actually different, smaller. The jaws are more narrow. The teeth are crooked and more crowded. And there's a very different set of features to the bone structure, big, high, tall cheekbones prior to agriculture. This is all nutritional. We know this now. This is in the current dentistry textbooks. And 100 years ago, a guy named Dr. Weston A. Price, who I'm sure you come across, did this huge study of indigenous populations. They had perfect teeth, perfect jaw, perfect bone structures. And then when they started being introduced to more Western plant-based eating, that started to recede quickly within one generation. And they found that he could actually stop that and reverse that by reintroducing animal fats and meat and things like that. So he theorized that there was some sort of vitamin X or some sort of a vitamin, the fat-soluble vitamin, only came in animal fats that we didn't quite know about yet. Now we call it vitamin K2. And so now we know in the dentistry journals that that crooked teeth and small jaws are not genetic. They are nutritional. The nutritional deficiencies of specifically vitamin K2, vitamin D3, and calcium, but most commonly K2 and D3. And so this is seen throughout the fossil record, and only in those areas that picked up agriculture, because there are many areas that didn't adopt these things, and they didn't have any of these degradations until recent times, where they've now been the Native Americans, the Maasai, and other sort of Native Australian Aboriginals, for that matter. They were much taller and much healthier prior to going on to a Western diet. Now they're some of the sickest people in those populations, and have much higher rates of heart disease, diabetes, cancer, etc. And people say it's because they have a problem with alcoholism and things like that. Newsflash: every country has a problem with alcoholism. People been to Australia. It's just like every Australian has a drinking problem. It's not just the Aboriginals. It's just that they're more susceptible to the toxins and harms that alcohol brings and that Western food brings. We dropped in height by 6 inches. And in fact, it took 10,000 years to start getting back up to a more normal height. The mammoth hunters, before all these animals died out, some of these populations, some areas, they range anywhere from 6'2" to 6'4" on average.
And
The average adult male height in America is 5'10". And so they're much taller than they are now. Denmark, things like that, they have typically higher average height, but they also eat a lot more meat and cheese and animal products. And then they might be 6 foot, still below where the mammoth hunters were. And so why did we shrink down so dramatically at that time? It's you're just not getting the right food. You're not getting all the right nutrients, vitamins, minerals, proteins, and fats in the right proportion. And you're also getting things that slow you down. Carbohydrates, we think, well, that's just energy. Oh, we need it. We don't need it. There's no such thing as an essential carbohydrate. And in fact, it can be detrimental. If you think about it from a growth perspective, carbohydrates raise insulin. Insulin blocks growth hormone. Growth hormone makes you grow. And people think, well, but insulin stimulates IGF-1. So growth hormone stimulates IGF-1 in the liver. Insulin can boost that up as well, but it's a biphasic curve. So initially, yes, when you're insulin sensitive, then you get, oh yeah, look at that little bump. And that's when you eat protein, you get a bit of an insulin bump and you'll get a bump in your IGF-1. Problem is when you keep eating massive amounts of carbohydrates and you keep getting these big insulin spikes, now you start to desensitize your liver to that insulin and you start downregulating those receptors. So in fact, when people become insulin resistant and diabetic, they actually find that there's a drastic drop in IGF-1 as well as a drastic drop in growth hormone. And we see this are actual receptors in the hypothalamus that insulin acts on directly. And you get this sort of response. So insulin will directly lower growth hormone. And then once you become really insulin resistant and you start getting more metabolically sick, then it suppresses IGF-1 as well. So that makes you grow. And so eating carbohydrates stunts your growth. It's as simple as that.
Huh. It's funny. I just had a meeting. I had a little dinner meeting with my great nephew, and he's into bodybuilding, and he's going to be a senior in high school. And he was going through all this. That's why we met. He had a lot of questions for me, but somehow a lot of bodybuilders, they say you have to have glucose, to eat all these carbs and giving yourself testosterone and all this. And that's the only way to grow. And I was trying to tell him what you just said is, no, actually, that's going to go against you. Mm-hmm. Have you ever had a conversation with that with anybody? Is there anything in particular that you found is a good conversation that gets them to wake up and think, do you have any specific thing you tend to tell people who think that?
Yeah, look, you just have to look at the data. You have to look at the studies. There are studies that show this, that there's a meta-analysis with, I think, 14 RCTs that show that ketogenic diet bodybuilders, they have the exact same level of hypertrophy and muscle growth on a ketogenic approach with zero carbohydrates as a carb-heavy diet, as long as protein is matched. So it's protein that's a major driver of that. There are professional IFBB pro bodybuilders that, Robert Sykes, who's that.
I showed my nephew a picture of Robert Sykes and see, I don't think you need to have carbs for this.
And he's been a lifelong natural competitor as well.
Yeah.
So that's just eating meat and maybe a bit of veg and things like that, but he's been ketogenic. He's not been using carbs. And so we know that. We have studies showing that. And in fact, there's a recent study that just came out this year is 2025. Anyway, within the last year, that actually showed that, so high blood sugar damages your body. It causes glycation. So you have this non-enzymatic fusion of any carbohydrate model, any and every carbohydrate molecule with different molecules and proteins and different lysine in the proteins itself. It permanently damages them. And so that builds up this damage over time. This damages your arteries, and that causes heart disease, it causes kidney failure, it causes blindness, it causes legs to getting amputated, things like that. All the consequences of diabetes come from that glycation, often from damaging the arteries, but it also damages your joints. You get arthritis, damages your discs, you get degenerative spines. It's something that I've seen a lot in neurosurgery, to do a lot of spinal surgeries. But also we get glycation. We now saw in this study that there's glycation to the extracellular matrix around the sarcomeres, the muscle fibers. And so that actually suppresses muscle growth and hypertrophy. And especially in certain populations where they're more sensitive to this, there's a certain subset of people, it's like 15, 20% of people, they get much more suppression of hypertrophy from glycation. So there's a certain amount of people that are just very slim, very skinny, and it doesn't matter how much they eat, doesn't matter how much they work out, they just can't put on muscle. This is probably because of the carbohydrates they're eating. And so that can actually slow you down, that can actually suppress muscle hypertrophy. So also, you got to think of why is this recommendation that we eat carbohydrates? Where is that coming from? A lot of it's bro science. And a lot of it just comes from, there's a few very successful professional bodybuilders like Dorian Yates who had a lot of carbohydrates, and they said, oh, that must mean carbohydrates make you build muscle. They're getting the cart before the horse, because Dorian Yates didn't just eat a ton of carbohydrates, and that's what made him grow bigger. He was one of the first ones to figure out that if you inject mass quantities of insulin, that could act as an anabolic steroid. And so you're doing all the other stack of hormones and growth hormone and testosterone and steroids. And then you add in insulin on top of that, and that can cause a further bulk and hypertrophy, because you're going to get levels of insulin far higher than your body will ever produce naturally. But as a consequence of that, if you don't add in 400 or 500 grams of carbohydrates with that, you will slip into a coma and die because of the amount of insulin. It's very dangerous. I actually have a friend of mine who's like a professional strongman powerlifter, and he dabbled with that. And he was in the gym and he passed out, smacked his head, and he was just like, I'm never doing that crap again. It's very dangerous. It's very dangerous. So it's getting the cart before the horse. So they're saying you take mass doses of insulin and you have to have carbs or you'll die. So it's not the carbs that's doing it. That's just protecting you from the insulin. It's the insulin that's doing it. So then people say, oh, just eat a whole bunch of carbs and that's going to get you. No, because it'll raise your insulin, but it's not going to raise it to such an extent that you're going to get that massive hypertrophic effect. And again, you're going to get this glycation and get it damaged. It's going to slow down your recovery. You're going to be sore and stiff and in pain. So you're not going to be able to get as good a workout. You're not going to be able to recover as much. You're not going to be able to work as hard, not work as long, and work as often. Whereas I lift weights every single day. I was doing 40 sets per muscle group 3 days a week. So I was doing 120 sets to failure each week. No one's doing that. No one's doing that, right? Yeah. So I could just do more volume, and so the amount of musculature I could get is way better than anybody else could get. Look at the old school bodybuilders before Dorian Yates. What do they eat? Steak and eggs. You go back to Vince Gironda, it's called the Iron Guru. He's the one who taught Arnold Schwarzenegger what he should eat when he first came to America. And it was steak and eggs. That's what you eat. And it wasn't until the steroid era and then the insulin era that the bodybuilders started adding it back in carbs. And now, unfortunately, kids in high school are like, oh, you have to eat carbs to get muscles. Muscles aren't made out of carbohydrates. They're made out of protein. In fact, meat is muscle. So if you're trying to build muscle, you want to get the nutrients required to build your own musculature. By definition, they're all going to be accessible in the muscle tissue of other animals. And so that's really and there's no carbs there. There's a bit of glycogen, that's it. But your body makes glycogen. You don't need to take it in through your diet.
See, and that's what my great nephew is taught is, no, your muscles have to have glucose in order to fire. And when you do that, you're going to empty all your glycogen stores in your muscle, and you have to have carbs to replace the glycogen stores and blah, blah. You're missing the whole picture here. Your body loves fat for an energy source. What you want is burning the fat out of your fat cells and using that for the energy in your muscles to keep carbs totally out of it. And you burn it a lot quicker. You don't have that hunger that you get after you work out. When you work out on carbs, all of a sudden you push that on in your muscles. Now you're starving. Chances are you're going to go eat more carbs, and just compounds the horrible effects of it. So,
I was just going to say, and it also just pushes it into fat. It's not just pushing it into your muscles. It's mostly pushing it into your fat. The insulin is actually driving this mostly into your fat. And you get intramuscular fat called myosteatosis. And we see this on MRIs in our patients. And that's strongly linked to metabolic disease and dysfunction, and then chronic pain and other sorts of joint issues. So, we look at the psoas muscles, the iliopsoas coming down from the spine. When we're doing spine surgery on people, we see these MRIs and you see this fatty infiltrate in the psoas. That's actually strongly associated with very poor outcomes from the surgery, and they have a lot of back pain and issues. And we see an association with very poor outcomes from surgery. So if we're going to do this operation and they have those signs, they're almost never recover. And they never, like from a pain perspective, they almost never improve because of that surgery. So you have to pick that and be like, okay, this is probably not a good surgical candidate. The thing is, though, too, is that people say a lot of things and they get repeated ad nauseum. And so that just becomes the standard, and without any evidence either asked for or provided. That was the Hitler propaganda machine, where they just say, repeat the lie, make it big, and keep saying it until people just take it as fact. And that's what we have here. There's no evidence for that. In fact, when you look at high elite athletes, There's a study from Dr. Volek in 2016 called the FASTER trial. And they took elite athletes, world-class Ironman and marathon runners. And a lot of them had already been ketogenic for sometimes years, average 22 months. So they were going to do a 3-hour run. And so what they did, they had carb athletes, these ultra competitor carb athletes, and then these ultra competitor keto athletes that had been doing keto for years. And these are world-class athletes, and they had already been doing this for years. It wasn't someone had to tell them this. They figured out this was beneficial for them in their competition. And what they did is they took biopsies of the muscle. They took muscle biopsies of both the keto and the carb groups before the 3-hour run, directly after the 3-hour run, and then 3 hours after recovery. And what they found was that the muscle glycogen levels for the keto and carb group have been carb loading for days before, and then sucking down gels and packets and energy drinks and things like that during the race or during the run. They found they had the exact same glycogen levels at all 3 stages, and that the keto group had the exact same recovery in muscle glycogen after 3 hours as the carb group, who were taking down carbs, and they were eating the whole time. The keto group was just, their body was doing it naturally.
Exactly.
So that's just not correct. And then we have other studies showing that when you're in a state of ketosis, you actually are, your muscles and what you're burning, and this is in athletes with athletic sort of expenditures, that again, you have the same level of glycogen, but that you're still oxidizing fat, burning fat and ketones in your muscles at over 90% VO2 max. In fact, the inflection point was at 86% VO2 max, was when you started eclipsing your caloric demand with carbohydrates instead of fat. So you're basically at about 50-50 at 86% VO2 max. In a carbohydrate athlete, it's about 55% VO2 max. And this is why they say, if you're just gonna do low level sort of exercise, then sure, yeah, you're going to burn fat. But as soon as you go over 50%, 55% VO2 max, then you have to switch to carbs. So you have to have carbs to be a high intensity athlete. Total bullshit. Yeah. It's only if you're eating carbs already, because eating carbs raises insulin, insulin blocks lipolysis. Now you cannot produce the amount of fat that you need for that level of exercise past 55% VO2 max. But when you're in ketosis, even for a week, and we saw this in the Supernova trial, you're already burning fat over 90% VO2 max. Now, if you're not fat adapted, you're not able to utilize the fat and the ketones appropriately. And so you may not have the same output right away. But after 6 to 8 weeks, we've already seen in athletes that you have no letdown in your performance after 6 weeks of keto adaptation in a randomized controlled crossover trial. So both sets of athletes did keto and carb subsequently, and then they switched. And they had no drop down in their athletic performance, but because they were locked into their fat stores, because insulin wasn't blocking it off, they didn't need to refuel. They didn't need to eat all these carbs. They just ran on their fat constantly. And then after 3 months, there's a McSweeney trial in 2018 that showed that after, again, with elite athletes, that after 3 months of being on a ketogenic diet, when they competed against carb athletes on a 100-mile run, a 6-second sprint, and a critical power test, that the ketogenic group beat the carb group on every single one of those. So any way that you can move your body athletically, be it aerobically or anaerobically, sharp burst, explosive power, sprinting, or even a long endurance run, the ketogenic group beat the carb group every single time. And when you look at the fat oxidization, Professor Noakes did this. He found that at 86% VO2 max was the inflection point when you start starting to use carbs, right? And fat oxidation isn't the sort of exclusive sole or predominant energy source. It just starts to shift at that point. That at that point, that these athletes were actually burning 1.8 grams of fat per minute, which doesn't sound like all that much. However, when you calculate out to an hour, that's 1,005 kilocalories per hour, which is the average caloric burn at the Tour de France for the top competitors at the Tour de France. And remember, this is the inflection point where you just start eclipsing fat with carbs. So that means that they were burning and producing their own natural carbs at about 1,000 kilocalories an hour. So they were producing naturally and burning naturally 2,000 kilocalories of energy, completely produced on their own. So when everybody says if you're doing these big competitions, you're doing 1,000 calorie burn, then you obviously need some carbs. Like, no, because we already know that you can actually produce over 2,000 calories completely on your own. So please tell me, like when you're doing
Right.
2,000, sustained 2,000 calories per hour burn, and then what are you doing? You're adding in 80 grams, 100 grams of carbs.
Yeah.
So another 300, 400 calories an hour at a 2,000 calorie burn. What are you talking about? That's just a drop in the bucket compared.
Right.
You're already burning. You're already able to produce 2,000 calories that we know of. Could be more. And so it's very strange. But then there's other studies that actually show that even in these high intensity athletic endeavors, that you only need 20 grams of carbs per hour. And so you just have 20 grams per carbs, and people can maintain this high output. But if you're burning 1,000 calories per hour, then an extra 80 calories per hour, what is that doing?
Right.
You know, the 920 of those calories have to be coming from your natural energy production, lipogenic to burning fat oxidation and gluconeogenesis, producing your own carbohydrates. So that doesn't make any sense. And in fact, there are studies going back to the 2004, 2005, and then later on have been just studied more. There's an idea called the central governor of fatigue, which is you're seeing these people doing these massive caloric burns, but then they're trying to give, okay, we'll give you less and less carbs, see how much you actually need. And it basically is like 20 grams. And so they said, okay, that same question, how does that make sense? Because that's obviously 80 grams or 80 calories per hour is not going to be enough to fuel this state. And so they said, okay, is this sort of a placebo effect? And so they gave them they gave a group the 20 grams, and then they gave other people just some sugar water, and they just held it in their mouth and rinsed it around. So they got that taste response up to their brain saying, hey, there's energy coming. They had the exact same performance boost. And they spit it out. So they weren't getting any calories in. So what's theorized is that your brain actually has a shutdown mechanism where it just says, hey, look, we're burning too much energy here. Whatever you're chasing, it's gone. Just stop it. Just stop wasting energy, because nature is efficient if it's anything. And so if you're not able to control and ration out your energy and nutrients properly, you're going to die, because there's scarcity, and you might hit a famine. If your body can't control your energy burn during that famine or during a hunt or whatever, you're going to die. You're not going to make it. And so getting that little bit of energy, your brain just goes, oh, okay, X, we're fine. Okay, you have energy coming in. Fine. Carry on.
Yeah.
And it opens it up. And so I work with a lot of top professional athletes around the world. I played professional rugby for 10 years before medical school. And for 5 of those years, I was a zero carb carnivore. And I've never in my life had better energy, better endurance, better athletic performance than when I was zero carb. It was night and day difference. So when everyone, oh no, you need that, it's just like that didn't even pass the smell test for me. It's like, no, I know that's false. I know what you're saying is false, because I've done that. I've lived that. I've proven that to myself, if no one else, that my athletic performance was far and away better when I had zero carbohydrates. And then when I came back to this in my late 30s, I'm 46 now, when I came back to this in my late 30s, I did the same thing. Within a few weeks, I had this massive energy boost and performance boost, and I felt so good. I went out back and started playing professional rugby again at 38.
Really?
And I was out of shape. I was just back from doing humanitarian work in Bangladesh. And so I was completely out of shape. I hadn't been running or even going to the gym. I was in a refugee camp. And I think I did push-ups twice the whole time I was there. It was like, that's it. And then I get back and I go carnivore, and I was already ketogenic, because I found that having carbs of any description, I would have extremely bad back pain and inflammation for days afterwards. And so I just naturally just steered away from that. But then I was just having vegetables and lean meat, because it's supposed to be lean. Fat's bad for you, and veggies are good for you, and all that sort of garbage. And I was trying to lean down and get back into shape so I could get back and play rugby. And I just wasn't feeling good. It's always hungry. Gut was just uncomfortable and sore all the time. And it just didn't feel good. It just felt like just fat and inflamed. I just didn't feel good. And then just dropping the vegetables and increasing the fatty meat, and especially increasing the fat that I was eating. Within 10 days, I lost 23 pounds in 10 days.
Really?
And then, and all the inflammation just dropped out of my body. I'm sure a lot of that was water weight, but some of it was fat too. And then I just kept dumping fat off my body and stacking on muscle to the point that when people say that you're either, if you're building muscle, you have to put on fat. And if you're losing fat, then you have to lose muscle. Total bullshit. That's only if you eat a whole bunch of carbs, because carbs are going to make you put on fat. And then when you try to lose fat, you cut the calories, cut the carbs, and then you lose that fat that's in the muscles, like the myosteatosis we talked about before. So that makes it look like your muscles are bulky, but they're just full of fat. And so then that goes away. Oh, my muscle shrank. No, it didn't. There wasn't muscle there in the first place. You lost fat. And I actually found that I was working out, I was lifting weights for 3-4 hours a day. Literally, I'm not being facetious. I could do 30, 40 sets of squats, 30, 40 sets of bench, and all these sorts of things. I capped it at 20 sets per major lift, like bench, incline bench, dips, squats, deadlifts, shoulder press, things like that. And I would cap it at that because I could keep going, but the 20 is already ridiculous. So I just said, all right, that's enough.
It is.
but I felt good doing it. I didn't want to stop. And so I had to limit myself because I had to stop somewhere. And so that was that. And so because I was working out so hard and because I was eating just the perfect diet for our body, I was putting on muscle very quickly. And I was offsetting the fat that I was losing. So I actually didn't lose any weight. I didn't lose weight so I lost 23 pounds in 10 days, and then I didn't lose an ounce 6 months. But visibly, I was changing in the mirror, and I had progress pictures where I was just, every month, I was just floored at how much difference there was. But I weighed exactly the same. I was 243 pounds on the nose every single morning when I woke up. And I thought it was hilarious. I thought, I was like, how long is this going to last? Let's go for the record. And but I never lost weight. So I was building muscle and burning fat at the exact same time, and they were offsetting. And I just thought it was interesting. It was perfectly offset.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
But you keep bringing up carnivore and keto. What do you consider carnivore? Are you talking strictly meat or anything that comes from an animal? Or do you have a strict definition of what you eat?
I just eat meat and eggs.
Just plain meat.
Just plain meat and eggs. And we might have some, very rarely. I'm not too anal about it, where it's just, that's for baby cows. Yeah, it is, but it doesn't mean it doesn't have good nutrients in it. It has great nutrients in it. But I want to avoid carbohydrates. I don't like carbs. I want to be ketogenic. I think that's a major factor of the benefits of being carnivore. I think one of the major reasons that ketogenic diets work so well is because it's getting you one big step closer to being on your natural, evolved, biologically appropriate diet, which is carnivore. Dairy, we've only been eating dairy for about the same amount of time that we've been eating grains and agriculture. So it's been about 12,000 years. And we see that in the genetic record as well, that lactase persistence, which is not universal around the world, only came into being prevalent throughout the populations about 10, 12,000 years ago, right around the same time that we switched to agriculture. And then also animal husbandry was part of that as well. And that was because we needed fat. We really needed fat. That was very important. We weren't getting these big fatty animals like mammoths and giant sloths. They were all dead now. And so we had to get fat from other sources. But also we see with agriculture kicking in, we also see amylase starting to come into the gene pool. And this is what people say. We weren't designed to eat starches. We weren't supposed to be eating plants. Why do we make this enzyme amylase that breaks down starch? And that's a good question, but you have to ask when we started making amylase. We didn't just always make this. It was really only in the last 10,000 years that amylase became very prevalent in the population. You see it here and there prior to that, but not from a population-wide level. And generally, you don't have multiple repeats of that gene. You just have one copy. And so, and the thing is too, is that we would have had the ability to break down starches and fiber and things like that millions of years ago. But we lost that ability. We have a vestigial organ called an appendix. It's about the size of your finger, but a gorilla's is the size of your arm. And that's where fiber packs in and breaks down and ferments into short chain fatty acids, and they get broken down further into ketones. And this is what the animals are running on. Basically, that's what they're absorbing and using. So cows and gorillas, they eat fibrous plants, but the bacteria break that down, and as a byproduct, as a waste product for them, are short chain fatty acids. And then the bacteria die off and they get broken down and eaten and consumed as proteins and nutrients, minerals, and vitamins. And so a cow and a horse and a gorilla, elephants, they eat fibrous plants, but what they absorb is fat and protein, usually about 70 to 80% calories from fat and the rest from protein, very small amount from carbohydrates, maybe about 1 or 2% of their total caloric intake from carbohydrates. And so we don't have that ability anymore. We lost that ability. We don't have the ability to break down fiber into fat and protein. So we need to eat animals that have already done the hard work for us. And we need to get our fat and protein from them as well. And yeah. And
that also brings up the question everybody has about fiber. I'm telling everybody, if you're eating carnivore or keto, you don't need fiber. Fiber is only if you eat plants, because plants get broken down and absorbed so quickly. Do you say the same thing, or what? You don't focus on fiber at all, do you?
No, you don't need it. In fact, you don't want it. There are plenty of studies showing that. Again, these are just things that have just been repeated ad nauseum, and so we think this is something we need. I remember when I was a kid in the 1980s, they said that everyone was getting constipated. We're like, what is this? Everyone's getting constipated, and we didn't have problems with this before. And people said we should eat more fiber. You get more roughage, and it causes more bulk, and then their peristalsis can move that through. What was that based on? Was that based on a study? No, it's just somebody just pulled that right out of their ass, and then they just repeated it, and it went on the news, and people just said, "Oh, okay, I guess I'll eat more fiber." Why is it that we only needed fiber? That as a species we needed fiber in 1986, but not before that? What kind of sense does that make? At that time, in that same era, is when we said, "Okay, we need to stop eating fat." That happened in 1980 with the dietary recommendations, and the McGovern report in 1977 kicked that off, and then the 1980s hit that, okay, everyone has to stop eating fat.
Yeah, and it goes worse. Everybody should eat nothing but glucose. The craziest thing. That was the worst food pyramid anybody could have ever come up with. But
you get 65-7% of your calories from carbohydrates. It's
from
insane.
Something you don't need at all.
Yeah, that's it. And then we've never eaten before, and that to that volume and extent. Right. And it's wild. And we stopped eating fat. Fat is actually what drives your digestion. Your body can only absorb a certain amount of fat based on your bile. And if your bile runs out, you really can't absorb fat, because bile breaks down and helps emulsify and absorb fatty acids. Except for some MCTs you can still absorb through your liver. But over 90% of the fat that you eat from a whole food source will not be absorbed without bile. And so when you run out of bile, and eventually you will, if you just keep eating fat, that excess bile will go out in your stool. So there's an overflow valve. You physically can't overeat fat. I hear people in the carnivore sort of community, you don't want too much fat. No, there was never such a thing as too much fat. That's that propagandistic thinking that we've had since the 1970s and 80s, saying that fat was bad. Fat's not bad. Plant oils are bad. Those are bad. Animal fat is not bad. Saturated fat is not bad. So there's no such thing as too much fat if it's from an animal source. Because a healthy animal source, there are differences. If you fed the animal the wrong things, it'll have higher plant fats like linoleic acid, which you don't want too much of. But
in fact, it's fat. When you eat fat, that's what actually stimulates the gallbladder to squeeze and release the bile out of the gallbladder. And so these people who aren't eating fat and they're eating all these plants and everything, that's why they're getting all this biliary sludging and having the gallbladder removed and everything. And that why? Because they aren't eating enough fat to actually stimulate it. And people,
that's it. Yeah.
It's crazy that everybody gets their gallbladder taken out right now instead of just changing their nutrition. But I totally get it, because nobody's telling them the truth.
But you're exactly right. And something that I figured out 8 or 9 years ago was that this is how this organ works. And if you look in physiology textbooks, you'll see that bile sits in the gallbladder until it's used, until it's stimulated by eating fat, and then it expresses it out. And it actually, because large predators may not get a kill every day. Lions may not get a kill more than once or twice a week. And so but you still need the same amount of fat. So if you're just producing bile and just going out and then getting reabsorbed, okay, that's not good enough. If you're eating once a week, twice a week, then you're not going to be able to absorb enough nutrients. And so your gallbladder stores that and concentrates it. And so even in the physiology textbook, it says that it's very normal for the gallbladder to concentrate bile over 20 times where it came out of your liver at. Okay, so you've taken chemistry. What does any hyperconcentrated solution do at rest? Forms precipitate, crystals. And so that's what bile sludge and gallstones are. So we look at associations. Associations are not causations, but we have a lot of these in medicine. And there are acronyms that you remember. It's the 4 Fs for gallstones. Female 40s fertile fat. Those are the 4 Fs, because this is more commonly where we see people getting gallstones. Okay, but what is it about that population? So you have a woman in her 40s, she's fertile, so she's probably had a few kids, got a little bit of extra baby weight, she's trying to lose it, so she's overweight, right? And what have we been telling people for the last 50 years to do? If you want to lose fat, you stop eating fat. That's it. And so what do? You stop eating fat, The bile builds up, gets concentrated, and it starts forming precipitate. And so then all of a sudden they're dieting and cutting their fat and starving themselves and all these sorts of things. And then a few months later, they start eating normally again because they're miserable and they hate it and their body is sick and starving. And then they eat something real that has some fat in it, and all of a sudden, oh, they have this pain. And then they go to the doctor and they're like, yeah, you have these gallstones because you've been eating too much fat. I said, I haven't eaten any fat. Well, it's from all the fat that you ate before that.
Yeah.
And it's just, come on, you're not even thinking. You're not even trying to think. We see this in people that get bariatric surgery. So they get like a bypass surgery or a sleeve or some other sort of curtailment to their digestive system in order to lose weight. It is very common for them to then get gallstones after. It's very common. And so typically they're all getting their gallbladders taken out in the next 6 months to a year. Very common and much higher than the rest of the population. And so what is often said is something happens metabolically when you lose weight really fast that drives gallstones. And that's, again, is a made up answer. What evidence is there of that? Going back to the fiber thing, what evidence do we have of that? All the only randomized controlled trials that have ever been done on constipation and fiber show that more fiber causes more constipation, and that people that have higher fiber diets actually have more health detriments. And that if you have benefits is compared to people eating a junk food diet that's low fiber versus a whole food meat-based diet that's low fiber. Those are two very different populations.
Yep.
And so when you see, I remember in my general surgery rotation years ago, we saw these people that had gallbladder disease. And there was one lady who had just had bariatric surgery for weight loss surgery, and she had gallstones, but she was convinced that she didn't have gallstones. She's, no, this can't be, I need a scan and this, that, and the other. She just wouldn't believe it until we showed her the images. And she said, look, I'm going to need some time to process this because you get gallstones from eating fat. And I have eaten zero fat for 3 months. I have not eaten any fat at all whatsoever for 3 months. And to me, it was very clear that's why she had gallstones.
Yes.
And the attending, called a consultant here, there's just something changes metabolically and all that sort of nonsense. Or maybe your premise is wrong that fat causes gallstones. And if we think about physiologically how the gallbladder works, it's so obvious that obviously it's not more fat, because more fat will make you express that bile. And it doesn't matter if you have a higher propensity to form gallstones. If there's no bile in the gallbladder, it can't form gallstones. So if you eat enough fat every day to where there is no bile in your gallbladder at the end of the day, it is not physically possible to make gallstones because it's not going to be there for long enough. So even if you made gallstones in a day, which no one does, it would be compatible with life, you'd be dead in the womb. That still wouldn't happen if you just ate enough fat every day. So in fact, more fat will protect you from gallstones. And in fact, when we stopped eating fat and we started massively reducing the fat that we were eating, that's when gallstones started becoming much more prevalent. And
as
you
well
see
as
this
almost everything else.
Exactly. And you see these populations and these women that are saying, hey, I'm not eating fat. So it's how they're losing fat. It's not that they're losing fat and that changes their metabolism somehow. It's how they're losing fat. Someone who's getting surgery, it's going to be life-threatening, and you can be malnourished and have malabsorption issue for the rest of your life. Yeah. And you can be, and the thing is too, is that oftentimes within 5 to 10 years, you regain more weight than you lost. And how is that appropriate as a doctor to say, hey, why don't we just do this? I guess the argument is that, oh, you're just going to keep getting worse, and this at least sets you back, and then you start getting worse from there. But you're not doing these people any good, really.
Yeah. Just like the GLP-1s.
That's it. And it's the quintessential deal with the devil. Yeah. You get this short-term result that you think that you want, but it makes you very sick. You lose your health, you lose your hair, and then you regain all that weight afterwards as well. And you get worse eating habits. I've seen people that when they were having problems, they had strictures and they couldn't get food past their stricture. The nutritionists at the weight loss clinic or the bariatric clinic, while they were waiting for surgery, things like that, they're like, look, just drink soda, just eat candy, just do anything. You just have to get these nutrients. Are you out of your mind? Like, why are you telling them? Yeah, exactly. It's just calories. Yeah. There's no nutrients in there. And the person has plenty of calories. The whole point is that they're trying to lose weight. They have calories. Yeah. What they need is nutrition. And now they're giving them the even worse eating habits.
Oh, yeah.
It's just insane. It's how you lost the weight, because these people are so serious about losing weight that they're willing to mutilate their body. And it is a mutilation. I really disagree with weight loss surgery under most circumstances. I'm sure you can find some outliers there that this can be beneficial. I can't think of one, honestly. And I haven't had a single patient that has needed that, because it can all be accomplished with diet. And so you're mutilating yourself. You're maybe facing a lifetime of malnourishment and illness, and you likely will regain all that weight anyway. And for what? But they're so serious about it. So what they're going to do is, okay, so they're going to go through that surgery. So also they're just like, okay, I'm going to lose fat. I'm so serious about this. I got this damn surgery. I have to be on board. And so they eat a zero fat diet. They will not eat fat. And they listen to the nutritionist that said, cut out all fat, just drink soda. Oh, great. Yeah. And so so they lose weight, but it's not that they lost weight. It's how they lost weight. It's by starving themselves and restricting fat down to zero. Right. And that's why they build up the gallstones.
And speaking of nutrients also, I know even as carnivore, a lot of nutrients in organ meats. Do you eat very many organ meats along with yours? And
I don't often. I have very good absorption, and so I tested all my blood markers, my vitamins and minerals, and they were all in optimal ranges, better than the normal ranges. So in fact, a lot of my things were above the normal reference range, and things like magnesium, for example. And I was in a debate with a professor of nutrition in LA at a convention. And it was a friendly sort of thing. He wasn't all that friendly, but it was supposed to be a friendly thing. And I was friendly, and he was friendly outside of that as well. But I think it was a lot of the things that he taught and teaches and things like that were being challenged. It was a bit unnerving for him, and he could understand that. But he would say, no, you can't do carnivore because it's deficient in fiber and magnesium. It's okay. We address the fiber thing. You can't even break it down. There are no nutrients in fiber, so it can't be an essential nutrient if there's no nutrients in the first place. Exactly. I haven't had fiber in a decade, so how essential is this? If it's essential, it means you can't live without it and you die. So what is the nutritional deficiency that you get without lack of fiber? You don't have enough niacin, you get pellagra and you die. You get beriberi and you die, right? So what is the vitamin deficiency you get from not eating fiber? It's good health. That's what you get when you don't have fiber, and good gut health and things. But he said magnesium. And that's the funny thing, is because my magnesium is off the charts.
Yeah, meat has a lot of magnesium in it.
It has enough, obviously, and it also doesn't come with anti-nutrients like phytic acid, lectins, oxalates, tannins, saponins, these things that disrupt our absorption that come in plants. Is another way that plants defend themselves, is by making it harder for you to get nutrition and sustain your life. And they block out magnesium, and then the magnesium in plants are not very bioavailable. It doesn't have, you can't extract a lot of those nutrients, again, because the plant's trying to protect its own nutrients and not benefit you by eating it. Meat is much more bioavailable, nearly 100% bioavailable for all these sorts of things. And so maybe you're getting less milligrams of magnesium on paper, but those milligrams of magnesium are much more bioavailable, and you're not getting any anti-nutrients that block out their absorption. So the end result is you get more magnesium.
And now, do you do fish?
Sometimes. Mostly it's beef.
Where do you mainly get your omega-3s? Just from beef?
So that's a good point. You need to be careful about the fat quality that you get. If you're eating grain finished things, then that's still very nutritious, more nutritious than anything else you're going to eat besides grass finished. But grass finished is difficult as well, because that's that's been used as a marketing term. In America, you can call something grass finished just because it's at some point eaten grass in its life. Or sorry, grass fed has been. And so you have to get 100% grass finished, or there's little things you look out for. But you have to say grass fed and grass finished. Real easy. If the fat is white, it's not grass finished. It should be yellow. When we cut open the human body, the fat's yellow. Yeah. When you look at a fully grass fed and finished animal, the fat is yellow. Huh. And so if that fat's bleach white, almost no chance that it's actually grass finished. Now, maybe it had some dry hay or something like that. Maybe it wasn't quite as nutritious, but typically if it's yellow, that's a good sign it's actually grass finished. In Australia, same thing. You can call something grass fed or grass finished, even if it's been in a feedlot for up to 3 months. 3 months in one day, you have to say it's grain finished. Huh. So again, you say, oh no, this is definitely grass fed. Oh yeah, no, definitely bleach white fat. I think I'll go somewhere else. Thank you. And yeah, but if you are getting grain fed, first of all, it's great nutrition. right? It's not as good as grass-fed and finished pasture raised, because you look at people, they publish their data on these sorts of things, and these regenerative farms that do things that way, 4, 5, 10, 20 times some of these nutrients. I just had, there's one farm that had 22 times the amount of folate in their beef than the USDA standard, and then a whole bunch of other nutrients as well. So these are very nutritious things, but it's still extraordinarily nutritious. And again, high bioavailability, no anti-nutrients. So you've got to be very well nourished. But one main thing is that if a cow's been, or a sheep has been in a feedlot for up to 3 months, it typically is run out of omega-3s. It needs those omega-3s from the grass and things like that. And so it's going to be much more of the omega-6 versus omega-3. So your profile is going to be off. And so, yes, you want to think about that. So grass-finished or grass-fed butter, grass-finished tallow should have a yellow tinge to it. You can get it on Amazon. It's cheap as chips. And fish, you can do some fish every now and then. I think that's a very good idea, especially for kids. Their brains are growing. You need to, you're 20% of your brain is made out of DHA, which is an animal form of omega-3. You don't not just need omega-3s. You need DHA and EPA. Those are the omega-3s that you specifically need. Plants have ALA. So I say, just eat a whole bunch of flaxseed. It has a whole bunch of omega-3s. No, that has ALA. And ALA does not convert into DHA or EPA. In fact, there's some studies that show it's less than 1% conversion. Other studies show that actually the more ALA you get, the less DHA and EPA you get. And especially in a whole food form, because it comes with a lot of LA, linoleic acid, which is the omega-6. And that suppresses and damages that conversion even further and can suppress DHA and EPA. It's not, we don't just need omega-3s. We need specific omega-3s. Right. We need DHA and EPA. And it's like saying that we just need omega-3s and whatever has that label omega-3, then that's fine. That's like saying we need water. That's essential for life. Water's a liquid. That's the category of substance it is. Therefore, vodka's also a liquid, and we just need liquid. Therefore, vodka is just as good as water. It's like, no, it's not. No, it's not. Or gasoline, or whatever. So that's just silly. And that's, again, it's just marketing and propaganda. So you want to get those animal fat sources. And so 20% of your brain is made out of DHA. And most of that gets laid into your brain within the first 2 years of life. So that's when it's most important to get those high quality animal fats in kids. Obviously, breastfeeding being very important early on, but the mother's diet is extremely important during that time. Your body's not just going to create something out of nothing. It can only transport nutrients that you have consumed through the breast milk.
That's why they're called essential fatty acids.
That's it. Yeah, exactly. And so you want those, and you want to give your kids these healthy fats and the grass-fed butter and some sardines, some mackerel, these things in water, not in olive oil or anything else that you put it in. Those sorts of things.
That brought up another request, and I know we're getting late on time, but I was really curious about this because you talk about the fat, you talk about what the brain, how much the brain needs fat, and Dr. Ovadia, I get Dr. Ovadia, so he was talking about how that's when he came to light about what all this is, when he's cutting into these people's chests for their heart surgery, and out that the fat just kept getting, over the years, more and more people started having all this fat buildup all around their hearts. What the heck's going on? Do you see the same thing when you're doing brain surgery? I was curious. Have you noticed, does fat increase? Can you see excess fat in the brains or anything? Is there anything that you would notice?
I've always
wondered that.
Yeah, not in the brain itself, but you obviously see the rest of the body and be very overweight, things like that. When doing spinal surgery, normally you have about that much tissue between your skin and the spinous processes in your back, or maybe even a little bit less. You're very slender. Some of these people have that huge chunk, and then you get down to the bone. You have to go down a little bit further, and then you drill out the bone. So you have to get these elongated instruments that goes this far, and you're just at the end of your capacity with the length of these tools, even with the extenders, and you're using a drill bit that's 75,000 RPM, 1 millimeter away from the spinal cord. And you're just like, it's really harrowing work, and it's extremely dangerous. Thankfully, I wasn't involved in any surgeries like that went wrong, but it was very stressful, those sort of situations. So you definitely see that. But one thing that you do notice, and that I have noticed, is that people that are more metabolically sick, do you see the evidence of glycation? You absolutely do. And so the glycation, the glucose binding to these different molecules, is
proteins mainly, right?
Proteins mainly, exactly. And so that's actually in culinary world, in food chemistry, that's actually called the Maillard reaction. MAILLARD, Maillard.
Or brownie.
And browning. That's it. And so when you toast a piece of bread and it turns brown, that's Maillard reaction. When you cook a steak on a pan and it browns, that's the Maillard reaction. That's glycation. It's just sped up with heat. And so that's happening in your body all the time. And so people talk to this, you're actually cooking yourself on the inside. You're getting this browning, you're getting this cooking from this glycation. And some research actually talk about this from a longevity point of view, is that your body's constantly cooking. It's just a slow bake oven. And that you're cooking your body slowly but surely with this Maillard reaction. And when you basically, the roast is done, that's when you die. That's when you're cooked all the way through and your body just shuts down and dies because it can't function anymore.
So what do you see? Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, I was saying, so what we
see,
so what we see is we see this browning over time, and you can see this in the bones. So, we used to be the saying, oh, it's bone white, but you look at someone's bones now, they're usually like a cream color, yellowy, or even brownish. But that happens with age and with metabolic dysfunction and maybe drinking and smoking. So you're increasing that Maillard reaction. When you operate on a baby skull, the bone is bone white. It is bleach white. It is as white can get. Yeah. And the bone is very hard. It's very strong. And then when you start growing up, you start getting early adulthood and 30s and 40s, start seeing a bit of it's more of a cream, sort of ivory sort of tone. It's a bit yellowed. But then when you get into someone in their 60s, maybe they're a smoker, they've got diabetes and things like that, there's actually a brown tint to the skull. And now the quality of the bone is much less. And so you can drill through it much easier. And then you have to be careful because you have to be careful with the pressure because you want to bang through and go to the brain. Because a lot of it, if you, in America, you do a lot of these things with guarded burr hole punch, and it'll stop as soon as it goes through. But at the same time, those make bigger holes than maybe you want. So oftentimes you might do a hand drill and do a much smaller hole so that you're not taking away too much bone tissue from it. And so we do a lot of hand drilling. And so if you're just going through and just mealy as hell and you're just burning through, you got to be very careful. And if it's very hard, you got to be very careful too, because you're given this force, you have to be very careful you don't plunge through. The quality of bone changes dramatically, and you actually see that browning over time. And that's something that I've absolutely noticed over the years.
That's really interesting. Yeah, that's what I actually got to watch a surgery. Had a kid who had to have burr holes put in. It was a horrible case, horrible bicycle wreck and brain swelling and everything. But it was an interesting surgery to watch. But
no, they are.
I know I've already kept you over an hour, and I didn't want to do that to you. Is there anything else that I had so many questions I was going to ask you, and we went on another tangent, and I love it. Thank you so much. Yeah. Is there anything in particular, people who are, what like if you had a 2-minute talk with a physician who is still practicing all the old medicine, doesn't understand how important nutrition is, what do you say? Do you have a couple minute thing that have you ever thought of this way or whatever?
Usually it comes up in different contexts, and sometimes people are asking me about it because they're just confused. They're like, wait, well, really? You don't eat any vegetables? What is that? So they're usually spurred on by their questions, or maybe they're challenged. Oh, you can't do that because of X. And so we address X. And so, but the thing is that we just have to realize this is something that's been in Western medicine and scientific-based medicine since Hippocrates. Hippocrates coined the phrase, let food be thy medicine and medicine thy food. Yep. That was all through Galen and throughout the 1800s into the 1900s. So William Osler, who was the first professor of medicine at Johns Hopkins University, he was knighted for his work in medical education. He's considered one of the greatest medical educators in history. And he was certainly one of the most, if not the most preeminent doctors of his age. That no one really questions that. There might be other people in different fields that were top of their field, but Osler was really considered one of the best ever. I have his textbook from 1910. It's his 7th edition. That was my great grandfather's, who was a surgeon. And in it, there's a chapter on diabetes. It says, this is how you treat diabetes. This is the gold standard. This is what everybody modeled after. Yep. And so this was gold out of Johns Hopkins. This was the treatment.
Type 1?
Everything.
Because they didn't have a whole lot of type 2 back then even, did they?
They didn't distinguish. It was basically, it wasn't until the 90s that they distinguished type 1 and type 2. Before then, it was juvenile and adult onset.
And so back then it was insulin dependent, which we blew that out of the water now.
Yeah, but that was the thing too, is that insulin hadn't been discovered yet. Insulin was discovered in 1921. So this book was 10 years prior to that. And so it was just diabetes. Diabetes, it means you pee a lot and it's sweet, diabetes mellitus. Diabetes, Latin for you're eating too much, mellitus means sweet. So yes, they actually tasted it, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so as opposed to diabetes insipidus, it's not sweet. And it was just diabetes. And you can get this as a kid, you can get this as an adult. And they said, yeah, usually the kids have a much worse prognosis. They do much worse. But the treatment for diabetics of all description, he said that Osler said in 1910, before we had insulin, he said, what we say, we still follow the practice of Dr. Sydenham, who was a very famous doctor in the 1600s. Okay, so this has been going on for 300 years, at least at that point. And this is a quote from Sydenham, who Osler quoted in this book in 1910. It said, let them eat easy to digest food, such as veal and mutton, avoid all fruit and garden stuff, so all fruits and vegetables, and reduce carbs to a minimum and keep it down to zero. What is that? That's only eat meat, don't eat any fruits, vegetables, or carbs. That's a carnivore diet, certainly a ketogenic diet. And that was the treatment for diabetes and many other things. Sydenham used that for all sorts of things for hundreds of years. And the really interesting thing about that is that Osler said that that older diabetics, it's just sorted out, it's done, just cured it. And we know that now. When you put people on ketogenic diets, that cures type 2 diabetes. But he said that this kept the type 1 diabetics alive much longer. That normally they'd fall into a coma and die within a week or two. But when you put them on this diet, they could stay alive 9 months to a year. And that's without insulin, right? And so the thing is that, so that must be treating something underlying, right? And the really interesting thing is that he said that the older diabetics, they just get sorted out. The younger diabetics, they had a much higher mortality. So there was a high mortality rate after about 9 months to a year. But people don't catch that. Oh, it's a high mortality rate. Yeah, that's bad. High, not absolute. That means that some of those kids were surviving without insulin. And just by changing their diet and living on a carnivore diet, they were actually putting into remission the type 1 diabetes and had to be making insulin again, or else it would have made it 9 months. But some of these people were actually living long-term without insulin. And I've actually seen that in my practice. I've had 2 type 1 diabetics. We caught them early within a couple of weeks out of coming out of the hospital, put them on a ketogenic carnivore diet, instantly stabilized their blood sugar, needed much more normal amounts of insulin, and weren't getting the big swings or anything like that. And 3 months later, they were actually able to come off insulin entirely, and their HbA1c was 4.5, which is low for a non-diabetic, no insulin. And then one of them wasn't able to maintain that because he was working away in the mine sites in Australia. And so he's gone for weeks at a time, couldn't get access to just carnivore food. So he started eating other things, instantly needed insulin again, started having all these problems. And then after a few months of that, said, okay, I got to go back. This is no way to live. And again, 3 months later, he was off all insulin and his HbA1c was back down to 4.5. We do see this happening. And type 1 diabetes is an autoimmune issue. All autoimmune issues that I've seen respond extremely well to a carnivore diet because I think it addresses the root cause. It removes these plant toxins called lectins and glyphosate and all these other sorts of things that poison the body. Yeah, all these things that can poison the body, damage the body, and trigger an immune response. There are immunologists and professors of immunology going back to the 1980s arguing that the body is actually not capable of attacking itself, and the idea of an autoimmune disease is asinine. And that, in fact, all of these conditions are already met by the known consequences of plant lectins that we've known since the mid-1970s. And so I see this in real life every day, that when you remove plants and lectins and you only eat meat, that autoimmunity goes away and the antibodies come down. And so if you have antibody sort of damage to your pancreas and your beta islet cells in your pancreas that make insulin, and you stop that damage, then the pancreas might be able to regenerate those beta cells, because in type 1 diabetes, it only damages the beta cells. It doesn't damage the beta stem cells. So you can potentially keep making these more beta cells, but if you just keep killing them as soon as they come up, then you're not going to see that. But if you stop the damage, then you might actually see those beta cells start to recover. And this doesn't happen in everybody. There's actually 2 case reports that are published in the literature of this exact same thing happening that I've seen, of completely reversing, putting into remission type 1 diabetes and coming off insulin. And I spoke to the lead author of those case reports, and she said that they've actually been treating type 1 diabetes for 15 years like this, and they've seen this dozens, if not hundreds of times, but it's almost always in the first year. Usually after that, they only had one patient that after that, but that was like 15 years after their diagnosis, it was actually able to come off all insulin. So it could very well be that eventually you burn out your stem cell reservoir,
Yeah.
and then absolutely you're not able to get them out after that. But she also said that the researcher said that it doesn't happen for everybody. Some people still need a bit of insulin, but they get so much better control. But some are able to come off totally, and those beta cells can recover. Some aren't. I would wonder if those people are just doing a carnivore diet, or it was with a carnivore diet they did this. That was it a ruminant carnivore diet? Because when you have the ruminant meat, they ferment and break down and strip out those lectins and toxins, and even break down glyphosate much easier than these other sorts of things. So maybe if you're eating all sorts of meat and you're getting a bit in there, maybe that's not enough. Maybe you're still getting a bit of damage. And I see that in autoimmune patients, and people with rheumatoid arthritis, people with Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis, things like that. Even if they have chicken or pork that's been factory farmed and fed a bunch of corn and soy, which they're not meant to eat either, that can trigger their autoimmune issues as well. Famously, Michaela Peterson, now Michaela Fuller, she coined the phrase the lion diet, because that's what she found with her rheumatoid arthritis, is she really had to just stick to beef and lamb. And that was the only thing. And she'd even have pork, and that would actually flare up her immune system, her autoimmune issues and rheumatoid arthritis. So maybe that's it. Maybe the ones that are able to get off entirely are the ones that are really just focusing on the ruminant meat.
Yeah.
And the other ones that are just having some other things as well, or maybe not being all the way strict, who knows? But if you come off of it, then the damage starts again, right? Because it's the lectins damaging the body, or the whatever, something that you bring in your body. That's damaging your body. That's bringing about an immune response. And then that's exacerbating things. So if you just stop eating that, there's no problem. If you have lead poisoning and you stop eating lead, great, problem solved. If you start eating lead again, it comes right back.
That's right. So we don't eat lead?
I would recommend not. No, it's not carnivore.
That's right. Thank you. That's good. I never really thought about it that way, about eating, about why you want to eat ruminant meat if you have certain diseases and everything. I've heard a lot of people going off. I've had my own clients that have had rheumatoid arthritis, congestive heart failure, AFib, these things that we've always been taught that it just gets progressively worse until you die. There's no reversing it. And they're off all their meds for all those, AFib, congestive heart failure. Never heard that before. And all of a sudden, here my clients are doing it. Like, this is crazy.
I've got a number of congestive heart failure patients who have just completely come off of it. I had one patient whose ejection fraction was 13%.
Oh my gosh.
And so he was on and that was on medications. And so he was circling the drain for a heart transplant.
Oh, yeah.
And 3 months, he was over 60% ejection fraction. 3 months. Yeah.
Just doing ruminant meat? Just sticking with the ruminant?
I actually don't even know. You're carnivore anyway. I don't know if he was just 100% red meat. But at this point, I don't remember asking. But 3 months. The thing is, though, it shouldn't come as a surprise to anybody, because we already have studies showing that just ketones make your heart more contractile. So we give people digitalis, digoxin, that makes the heart beat harder, so it gets out more of that ejection fraction. Ketones already do that. Ketones can improve ejection fraction by up to 30%, just on its own, right? And your heart wants ketones and fat oxidation. Actually, it runs better on fat oxidation, but it will run on ketones better than glucose. And this is the thing: if you just take exogenous ketones, they've actually done studies on this with heart failure, that your heart will just switch over to those ketones straight away, and your heart starts beating harder, and your ejection fraction improves instantly. And if you go into fasting, or if you go into ketogenic diet and go into a ketogenic state, the heart starts beating better and your ejection fraction improves immediately. So imagine what happens after 3 months, where your heart's just improving. That's what we're seeing. That's what you're seeing. That's what I'm seeing. And sometimes very extreme cases. Now, if you have ischemic damage, you've had a myocardial infarction and part of the wall is dead, that's probably not going to regrow, but the rest of the heart is going to beat a lot better. So depending on why you have heart failure, it may be more limited. But from what I've seen, even in those cases, I've had patients that have improved 20, 30 points on their ejection fraction with having formerly had a sort of ischemic heart failure where they've had a myocardial infarction, and now their ejection fraction is down at 20 or something like that. And then they go ketogenic carnivore, and after several months, they're up to 45, 46. Massive improvement. So look, it's not 100% normal like when they were a kid. It's miles, but it's more than twice. It's just going from 20 to 40 it's logarithmic. I mean, the amount of benefit that you get in that doubling is much more than double the benefits that you get from that. So even then, if there's ischemic damage, the rest of the heart is going to be a lot better as well. And so you're going to really improve your function. That maybe we don't have randomized controlled trials, people on carnivore. We absolutely have trials on ketogenics showing that this improves cardiac function. And so from what I've seen, I've yet to see someone with heart failure of any description that has not improved by doing a ketogenic carnivore approach. And it makes sense why I would.
Man, that is so interesting. This has been awesome. This has been awesome. Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for all this. If somebody wants to get a hold of you, if somebody wants to follow you, how do you tell them to get a hold of you?
Oh, I have a website. It's just dranthonychaffee.com. So dranthonychaffee.com. And that has all links to all my socials and my podcast. And it pops up with new videos on YouTube and things like that. I've got actually a provider list. I just rolled this out where if doctors, if they practice ketogenic or carnivore approaches or they understand it, there's a lot of patients that don't want to go to regular doctors because they don't understand what they're doing and why it's beneficial. And so they're looking for carnivore doctors or ketogenic doctors in their area. So I've started that so doctors can sign up, or providers nutritionists can sign up, pharmacists can sign up and put in where they are and things like that for people to find that. It literally just rolled out. So I don't think there's too many people on there yet, but if people want to sign up, they can do that. And I have a lot of resources and studies and things you can just search in there for cholesterol, heart disease, or whatever. You'll get a bunch of studies, a bunch of papers and videos and lectures and things like that as well.
Okay.
And more. And you'll have links to my YouTube and things like that. But social media is often where I'll be. And my YouTube channel is just my name, Anthony Chaffee, MD. And that's where I have all my videos and the podcast. And then if people want to listen to the podcast, it's on any major podcast platform. And it's just called The Plant Free MD. And then I'm on Instagram and X and things like that. But that can all be found through my website.
Yeah. Okay. That sounds wonderful. Thank you so much. I know you've been busy. I know you just flew back from Australia and you're here again, and I appreciate you taking time to come in and talk to my audience for me. And I hope they got as much out of this as I did, because I learned all kinds of stuff today. So thank you. Thank you so much for doing this.
Yeah, you're very welcome. And thank you very much for having me. I hope people like it.
Oh, I'm sure they will. So that's what we have for today. That was Anthony Chaffee, Dr. Anthony Chaffee. And I appreciate so much you coming on here. For all you listening, thank you so much for listening to us. And we will see you on the next podcast. Talk later. Bye.